But the expansion into Latin America also brought the Hells Angels into direct contact with criminal organizations that operated on a completely different level of violence and sophistication. The Mexican cartels, in particular, have evolved far beyond their origins as drug trafficking organizations to become what analysts describe as criminal insurgencies, quasi-military organizations that control territory, operate their own intelligence networks, and possess firepower that rivals that of national armies. The fundamental problem with the Hells Angels' Latin American expansion was their misunderstanding of their role in the regional criminal hierarchy. While they were accustomed to being the dominant criminal organization in their traditional territories, in Latin America, they found themselves relegated to the role of junior partners and auxiliary service providers. This subordinate position was difficult for an organization built on concepts of brotherhood, respect, and territorial dominance to accept. The breaking point came when individual chapters and members began to exceed their assigned roles. However, in Mexico, their collaboration with cartels has provoked state crackdowns and cartel retaliation. The report cites a 2024 incident where a Hells Angels-linked trafficker was killed in Mexico, likely due to overstepping boundaries in cartel territory. This killing wasn't just the elimination of a single problematic individual, it was a message to the entire Hells Angels organization about the consequences of challenging cartel authority. The Hells Angels' attempt to carve out a larger role in Mexico's drug trade, rather than remaining subordinate, has led to violent consequences as cartels fiercely guard their dominance. But up next, we have a Hells Angel member who messed with a cartel across the Pacific and paid a deadly price. Wayne Schneider, death in the land of smiles. Thailand, known as the Land of Smiles for its reputation for hospitality and Buddhist tranquility, became the setting for one of the most brutal internal conflicts in Hells Angels history when Wayne Schneider, a high-ranking Australian member of the notorious motorcycle club, met his end in November 2015. But this wasn't just an internal power struggle, it was a killing that revealed the deadly consequences of mishandling relationships with international drug cartels in Southeast Asia's thriving methamphetamine trade. Wayne Schneider wasn't just any ordinary Hells Angels member. He was a high-ranking figure in the Pattaya chapter, with ties to Sydney, representing the kind of international connections that made the Hells Angels valuable partners to drug trafficking organizations around the world. Pattaya, Thailand's infamous resort city, known for its anything-goes atmosphere and minimal law enforcement oversight, had become a crucial hub for Australian criminal organizations looking to establish footholds in the Asian drug trade. The circumstances of Schneider's death read like something out of a crime thriller, but the brutal reality was far more terrifying than any fictional account. Schneider was kidnapped at gunpoint outside his villa, taken to a flat, tied to a chair, and beaten to death by 5 other Hells Angels members. The methodical nature of his torture and execution suggested that this wasn't a crime of passion, but rather a carefully planned punishment for what his fellow club members saw as an unforgivable betrayal. But what could drive members of the same criminal brotherhood to turn on each other with such savage brutality? Thai authorities linked Schneider's death to a failed drug smuggling operation involving methamphetamine, possibly tied to Mexican cartels, given the Hells Angels' history of collaboration with groups like the Sinaloa cartel. The methamphetamine trade in Southeast Asia has become increasingly dominated by Mexican cartel expertise and investment, as these organizations have exported their industrial-scale production methods and distribution networks to every corner of the globe. The most likely scenario, based on the evidence and the brutal nature of Schneider's execution, is that he had been entrusted with a significant methamphetamine shipment or had been responsible for maintaining cartel relationships in the region, and something had gone catastrophically wrong. The killing is believed to have been ordered due to Schneider's mishandling of a deal or betrayal of cartel-linked partners, illustrating the deadly consequences of crossing powerful drug networks. In the world of international drug trafficking, trust is the most valuable currency, and betrayal is the most expensive mistake anyone can make. The cartels don't just demand loyalty from their direct employees, they expect it from every link in their supply chain, including the motorcycle clubs and criminal organizations they partner with around the world. When that trust is broken, the consequences extend far beyond the individual who committed the transgression. The next rider on this list had the Sinaloa cartel ready to take him out. Jimmy Cournoyer. In Canadian organized crime, few names carry as much weight as Jimmy Cournoyer, a man who built a criminal empire that generated over $1 billion in revenue and connected some of the most powerful criminal organizations in North America. But Cournoyer's story is also a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition exceeds judgment, and when even the most successful criminals make the fatal mistake of becoming too visible to both law enforcement and their cartel partners. Canadian drug kingpin Jimmy Cournoyer, sentenced to 27 years in prison in 2020, 2015, ran a Montreal-based trafficking organization with ties to the Hells Angels, the Rizzuto and Bonanno crime families, and the Sinaloa Cartel. This wasn't just a criminal organization, it was a multinational corporation built on violence, corruption, and the insatiable North American appetite for illegal drugs. Cournoyer had managed to achieve what few criminals ever accomplish. He had built bridges between disparate criminal organizations and created a network that could move drugs across international borders with the efficiency of a legitimate business. The scope of Cournoyer's operation was staggering by any measure. Between 1998 and 2012, Cournoyer's network trafficked over $1 billion in marijuana, cocaine, and ecstasy, using Hells Angels transportation networks to smuggle drugs across the US-Canada border. This 14-year run represented one of the most successful drug trafficking operations in North American history, moving hundreds of tons of drugs and generating profits that rivaled those of legitimate Fortune 500 companies. The Hells Angels played a crucial role in Cournoyer's operation, providing not just muscle and intimidation, but also the sophisticated transportation networks that made large-scale smuggling possible. The motorcycle club's chapters on both sides of the US-Canada border created a ready-made infrastructure for moving drugs, money, and personnel across what is supposedly one of the most secure borders in the world. This relationship was mutually beneficial. Cournoyer got access to distribution networks and protection, while the Hells Angels received substantial payments and a steady supply of drugs for their own retail operations. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Cournoyer's operation was his relationship with the Sinaloa Cartel. His operation involved purchasing cocaine from the Sinaloa Cartel for distribution in Canada. This connection to Mexican suppliers gave Cournoyer access to high-quality cocaine at wholesale prices, but it also made him dependent on one of the most violent and unpredictable criminal organizations in the world. The beginning of the end for Cournoyer came when he made a decision that would ultimately destroy everything he had built. Cournoyer's attempt to establish a $2 million hit fund to silence cooperators drew intense law enforcement scrutiny, leading to his arrest and the dismantling of his empire. This hit fund represented a fundamental miscalculation. While violence had always been an integral part of Cournoyer's operations, the creation of such an explicit and well-funded assassination program crossed a line that made him a priority target for law enforcement agencies across multiple countries. The Sinaloa Cartel's reaction to Cournoyer's downfall was swift and predictable. The Sinaloa Cartel, known for eliminating liabilities, likely viewed Cournoyer's high-profile operation as a risk, and his ties to the Hells Angels may have provoked cartel distrust, contributing to his downfall. From the cartel's perspective, Cournoyer had become exactly the kind of liability they couldn't afford, a partner whose operations had become so visible and so violence-prone that they threatened to bring unwanted attention to the entire network. For the cartel, he was simply a loose end that needed fixing, and he knows better than to snitch while behind bars. Next, we have a Hells Angels couple that overreached into the cartel's criminal enterprise and instantly got taken down. Charles "Pup" Phillips. The desert landscapes of Arizona, with their endless stretches of empty highway and remote mountain ranges, have long served as a crucial corridor for drug smuggling operations, moving product from Mexico into the heart of the United States. It was in this unforgiving terrain that the Hells Angels established one of their most ambitious methamphetamine operations, and where they learned a harsh lesson about the dangers of expanding into territory already claimed by Mexican cartels. In August 2018, Hells Angels member Charles Denver "Pup" Phillips and his wife Lois were arrested in Anchorage, Alaska, after an FBI task force seized 12 pounds of methamphetamine and $25,000 in cash. But this arrest was just the tip of the iceberg, revealing a sophisticated drug manufacturing and distribution operation that had been operating under the radar of law enforcement for years. The fact that Phillips was arrested in Alaska, thousands of miles from Arizona, demonstrated the interstate scope of the Hells Angels methamphetamine network and their ability to move product across vast distances. The Arizona operation wasn't just a small-time drug-dealing scheme run by a local motorcycle club chapter. The Arizona Hells Angels were producing and distributing meth, both independently and in conjunction with Mexican cartels. This dual approach, operating both as independent manufacturers and as partners with cartel suppliers, represented a dangerous balancing act that ultimately proved unsustainable. The Hells Angels were essentially trying to have it both ways. They wanted the independence and higher profit margins that came with manufacturing their own product, while also maintaining maintaining access to the high-quality methamphetamine and established distribution networks controlled by the Mexican cartels. The sophistication of the Arizona operation became clear when law enforcement officers examined the evidence seized during their investigation. A ledger found during the raid listed quantities and Hells Angels prospects, indicating a structured operation. This wasn't a casual drug-dealing operation run by a few rogue bikers. It was a carefully organized business that tracked inventory, managed personnel, and maintained detailed records of its operations. The ledger represented exactly the kind of operational security breach that sophisticated criminal organizations work desperately to avoid. The response from Arizona law enforcement was swift and comprehensive. The Arizona Department of Public Safety classified the Hells Angels as a criminal street gang, a designation that brought enhanced penalties and increased surveillance to bear on the organization. This official classification meant that the Hells Angels were no longer just another motorcycle club in the eyes of the law. They were now a designated criminal organization whose members could be prosecuted under enhanced penalties and whose activities would be subject to intense ongoing scrutiny. But the real danger for the Hells Angels came not from law enforcement, but from their cartel partners. The bust suggested overreach into cartel-controlled meth production. Mexican cartels, protective of their supply chains, may have retaliated through increased scrutiny or violence against Hells Angels members involved, as cartels often eliminate partners who attract law enforcement attention. The Mexican cartels had invested enormous resources in establishing their methamphetamine production and distribution networks, and they viewed any interference with these operations, whether from competitors or from partners who brought unwanted law enforcement attention, as a direct threat to their business interests. This fundamental misunderstanding of power dynamics in the Latin American criminal landscape would prove to be one of the most costly mistakes in Hells Angels history, resulting in multiple deaths and the effective limitation of their expansion ambitions in the region. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to watch another fascinating video like this, click on one of the boxes on your screen right now.